Okay, so as teachers, we have field trips with students, and sometimes those field trips are just wonderful, but more often than not, they become one of the hardest days of the year. You come home just exhausted and fatigued, and inevitably something goes wrong that you don't anticipate. There's always excitement building up for this trip. The kids are always excited. Sometimes they're nervous if it's their first time to ever go on a trip. Parents are always nervous to send their children out. Um, but we're going to talk about field trips today. In this lesson, um, I've been doing a Beth Moore Bible study on, um, there's different ones. I've done David and now I'm doing Jesus. And she talks about the disciples going on a field trip. And I just keep thinking about it and keep thinking about it. And I know right now I'm definitely on a field trip, and it helps me stay positive and encouraged about this when I think about it in those terms. And so I wanted to share with you what I've been thinking and learning. And so a field trip is an educational trip in which students are expected to visit the natural setting and obtain firsthand information by observing places, objects, and phenomena. It is a type of learning that takes place in a natural setting. So we take students to a farm if we're learning about agriculture or farm life, or we want children in young grades to learn about different animals, or we take them to some type of park, or we take them even further away to maybe Washington, D.C. or something like that. And it's a concrete and realistic method of teaching and learning. So they're learning through real life. And when we think about the way students learn when they're in school, um, a lot of times it's teacher led. The teacher is feeding this information to the students. They're asking the students questions, and the students answer questions, and they're reading about things, or they're looking up information online or watching videos, or maybe it's hands on learning where they're actually making an arts and crafts project, or in science class, they're doing an experiment or something of that nature. But when we go on a field trip, it's to provide a new experience for students that maybe they've never experienced before. We don't think they're going to ever get to experience that. I've taken kids on field trips where it was the only time they've ever ridden in an elevator or been on an escalator because their families don't travel. Or one time I was talking about we're going to have lunch at the food court because we were going to a mall to have lunch at the food court. That way they would have lots of choices. And, I assumed that the students knew what a food court was, but I had one young man who kept asking me over and over again, Miss Tackett, where are we going to have lunch? And finally I said, I've told you all, we're going to eat at the food court. And he said, I don't know what that is. And so um, by taking kids outside of the classroom, they get a whole new experience that perhaps is new to them. It can be to reinforce or extend what we've learned in the classroom. So we can sit and talk to students all day long about growing plants. But if they never touch dirt and they never touch seeds and they never see a plant grow or touch a plant, um, it's never going to be as real, and the learning is never going to be as deep and as meaningful as if they experience it. It gives students opportunities to apply their learning to real world situations. So I've taken students on many field trips, extensive field trips. I want to tell you about one in particular where they've been working on projects that are a year-long engineering project, and they get to go and compete at a state level competition. And so they're able to really show what they've learned in a much broader way. And um, it's just an opportunity that, perhaps they'll never get again in their life. And then finally, it lets them reflect on their learning And if they've if if a student has experienced something before they learn about it, then their learning is so much easier and so much more meaningful. And so a lot of times teachers will take students on a field trip before they start learning about a concept in science or social studies so that they can build background knowledge. And so I've thought about that, why we take field trips, because field trips are not easy. They are hard work for the teacher. And um, as Christians, it's like we're in the classroom. We read our Bible, we go to Sunday school, we do Bible study groups, we do our devotions, that other people have written, just like the Beth Moore study that I told you that I'm reading through. We hear about other people's experiences and how they're growing um, through their lives and the things that they are going through. We read books on different topics. We've talked about prayer many times in this group, and all of the books. Do we read more about prayer than we actually pray? We read a lot. We listen to sermons in church, and we listen to Christian radio and podcasts and videos on YouTube. You can fill in a blank of, what is it that you do to learn and grow in your faith? And all of these things I relate to being classroom learning. We're learning about it. But sometimes we go on a field trip and we get the opportunity to apply all of that stuff we're learning to our life. And so, why are field trips dreaded? I told you I was going to tell you about a particular field trip fiasco that I had. And this is a picture of me and the 5 students and the other teacher who went with me. Thank goodness she was there. And we had worked on a project all year. It was community problem solving, and these students had done such amazing work with the homeless shelter in Pikeville. They actually did a book drive and put a library in the homeless shelter, because we learned that people who are homeless don't have a permanent address, and so they can't qualify for a library card. So they can't even check out books from the library. And so by creating this library, and they also created a garden, raised bed garden at the homeless shelter, we were able to help the residents there become more self-sufficient. And so this was their community problem solving project. They won in the state, and they got to go to international competition, which was in Iowa. And so we planned and we planned and we fundraised and we did all of the things. We got our plane tickets and we had the whole trip scheduled, and off we went. And this was us in the airport before we left. So, field trips are hard, and they're oftentimes dreaded because they're expensive, they're exhausting. Um, it never fails. As teachers, we're nervous about what might happen. If you're going with a group of kindergartners, you're going to have lots of paper towels and garbage bags in case someone gets sick. You're going to have extra change of clothes just in case someone needs them. I've even created a makeshift uh, potty chair in the main back of the bus, when I've gone on long trips with kindergarten students, because bathroom breaks have to happen spontaneously and we can't always stop. Um, a lot of times it's new. It's new to the kids, and so it's outside of their comfort zone. Several of these students that flew with me had never flown before. It's a change of plans. We aren't doing what we normally do. It's the routine of our classroom is so well known and so predictable, and field trips are not. And some last a very long time, just like this trip I'm going to tell you more about. Um, as we After we finished up our competition in Iowa, we were supposed to fly out the next morning, and I get a message that all of our flights have been canceled, and if we are going to get to the airport, we're going to have to take an alternate flight, which is going to leave super early, and so our transportation to the airport was going to have to be moved up. And so I had to load these children up in the middle of the night while they were sleeping, wake them up, and take them by bus to the airport, where we were told that those flights that we had changed to had also been canceled. And so we had to get a hotel room there. Of course, none of that was covered by the airline because it was an act of God, they said, because of the storms. It had caused all of this problem. And so I was on my personal credit card having to get hotel rooms and buy food because a lot of these kids, they didn't budget that much food money. Um, so anyway, that was a trip that just went crazy. We ended up having our flights canceled 5 different times. We had to get on a Greyhound bus from the airport in Chicago. We finally did get to Chicago, but from there we couldn't get on into Cincinnati Airport. So we had to catch a taxi to a Greyhound bus station where we rode Greyhound buses back to Cincinnati and parents picked us up. That is the worst field trip I have ever been on. When you have grown boys, crying for their moms because they're so stressed and nervous and worried, um, and you're responsible, it's a lot. And so when I think about field trips, I have great memories of these trips with these kids, but they are not for the faint of heart. So think about what you might be going through right now. And I just did this search, and I think this is somewhat outdated, but I think it's fairly accurate that these are all things that would cause us a lot of stress, things that would take us out of our norm, things that would not be predictable, and takes us out of the classroom and takes us on a field trip. And so for me right now, it would be the change in health of a family member. I told you last week about my mother in law and all of the struggles and all of the unknowns that we have in dealing with her health and her health care. And so many things are just unanswered. And we just have to be patient and wait and see what happens. And that can be very challenging. But we're going to be thinking about these difficult times as a field trip when we're getting out of our classroom and we're having to apply those things that we're learning in our Bible studies and in our Bible reading and in our things that we hear from our pastors to our everyday. And so I thought about some different Bible characters and field trips that they took. And if we think about Mary and Martha, when their brother Lazarus had passed away, and they saw that as being the end, they were frustrated that it wasn't what they expected to happen. They, even when he got sick, they expected Jesus to show up, and he did not show up until after Lazarus had died. But looking back, things that Mary and Martha could have learned was that Jesus is always on time. His timing is perfect. His power is limitless. He's always faithful. And he's compassionate. He feels our pain. And then you can read about the story of Mary, Martha, and Lazarus in John chapter 11. And one verse that stood out to me is, that Jesus wept. He has compassion and he understands. And then we think about Daniel, and we've talked about Daniel before. In Daniel 6, we can read the story of Daniel in the lion's den. And lessons Daniel learned, or that we can learn from Daniel, is to keep our eyes upward. Don't worry about the obvious circumstances. His circumstances were that people were turning against him. They were, ratting him out to the king because he would not stop praying. He wasn't, he wasn't worried about those lions. He kept his eyes on God. It shows us that, God can control our enemies. He was totally in control. And what we have to do is stand firm in prayer. And when we do that, we can relax. And I won't say enjoy the ride, but it's so much easier when you keep those things in mind when you're going on these field trips. And so Daniel 6:13 says he still prays 3 times a day. He was so faithful in his prayer life. And I think when little worries start to creep in our mind, When I start thinking, um, what if Nell doesn't walk? What if she doesn't make any improvement in her therapy? What if she becomes bedfast? I just immediately have to stop and think, I don't need to worry about that. I need to pray about that and offer it up to Him over and over again throughout the day. And then I was thinking about the wedding party where Jesus turned the water into wine. And the lesson there is that He provides what we need, and nothing is insignificant. We may not think that that wine was that important, but it was His first recorded miracle. And what He provides is more and even better than what we need. So if we think about the feeding of um, the thousands with the bread and the fish, it was more than what they needed. They had plenty left over. And so John 2, verse 10, you can read that story in John 2, but you have saved the best till now. And so that just stood out to me that, we can say that to God, you have saved the best till now. I know this doesn't seem easy and I don't know where it's going to lead, but I know you're saving the best till now. And in verse 11, what Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee was the first of the signs through which He revealed His glory, and His disciples believed in Him. And so other people are watching, and um, and they have their eyes on us. And so we need to um, show every opportunity that we have um, that where our faith comes from. And so I think about how this applies to me, and I've already talked about it, but we all go on field trips where we learn from our experiences. And I think those are the best teachers, of course. We can read stories of those who were found faithful and unfaithful. But the real learning is when we apply it to our everyday problems. And I'm excited for the learning and growth, or I'm depressed and just ready to quit and give up. So when we recognize that we're on one of these field trips where you know, we're having to apply all of those lessons we're learning, then I think it motivates us not to just throw in the towel and um, feel depressed. And do I soak up the experience so that I'm aware of the good that God is doing? If I have that mindset that I'm on a field trip, God is growing me through this experience, then we can do it with a positive attitude, and we can look for the good. And do I recognize all He is providing and doing while on the journey? So on my field trip fiasco, when we were in the hotel in Iowa, not knowing when we would get to fly to Chicago, our hotel fortunately had a pool. And those kids did not go to Iowa with swimsuits. So they just used their shorts and their t-shirts, and they enjoyed the pool. And then once we got to Chicago and we were in the airport for, it was over 12 hours, um, we decided to create a funny little poster for the parents. And so we talked about all of the things that we did while we were in the airport. And so the kids posed for me. We had a dance contest. They went and got Starbucks. They braided hair. Um, they read, they slept, and we just made it a fun time. And so I think even though these kids were stressed out, and I was certainly stressed out, because once I got in the Greyhound bus to head to Cincinnati, I reached down to get my computer and realized that I didn't have the tote bag that had 2 computers and 3 iPads, I think it was, in it. And I just had a meltdown and started crying. And it was just so overwhelming that I had left the bag with all of the technology in the taxi in Chicago. And, the students were there. They saw me get upset. Um, and all of this time, I'd been trying to be really, really strong so that they wouldn't know that I was nervous and that I was feeling the pressure, being responsible for this. Um, and I got my team teacher's hand, Michelle Scott. She's a great Christian lady, and we just prayed right there that he would get us home safely, and that if it be his will, somehow the technology would be returned. And, that seemed impossible. That, first of all, if anyone found that much technology, it was probably $4,000 worth of computers and iPads. They wouldn't return it. And if they did, how would they find me in Kentucky? Um, But don't you know, the next morning, I get an email from the taxi cab driver that he had gone to different people that he had dropped off and tried to return my things, my bag to them, like at restaurants, people he dropped off at different stops, and nobody would claim it as being theirs. And then he took it home with him and went through all of the things and found my name in the bag. He got on the internet and he looked me up and found that I taught at Pikeville and was able to get to my email through um, the teacher website or the emails, and emailed me to see if I was the person who had students in his van. And, and then he paid to have all of that shipped to me. It was like 40 some dollars shipping, and didn't ask for anything. Of course, I paid him back for all of that and more. And I was so appreciative, and sent letters to his employers of just how amazing he was. But I think it goes to show that in the end, we go through hardships, we go through these detours and these field trips that um, make us apply all that stuff we're learning and that we're using to help us grow. But the real growth is when we have to put it into practice. So, a couple of scriptures that I wanted to put in my journal. I really enjoyed this translation, the New Living Translation of Psalms 32:8. The Lord says, I will guide you along the best pathway for your life. I will advise you and watch over you. So it's like we're on a path and He will guide us. We just have to trust. And then Philippians 4:9, whatever you have learned or received or heard from me or seen in me, put it into practice, and the God of peace will be with you. And that is Paul speaking to the Philippians. And he's saying, if you've seen anything in me or heard it from me, put it into practice. So we're not just to listen, but we have to put it into practice. And the God of peace will be with you. And He will give us that peace that we need. And so my journaling ideas are to create this little map. You might put mountains on it. You might actually take a map, a piece of, an old map or a book page out of an atlas or something of that nature that has maps or topographical lines on it, and put it on your page. I'm just going to draw out like a little road. And then I loved all the stop signs, a stop sign to yield, go this way, the red lights. And I'll show you how I'm going to do that. And then, of course, I wanted a school bus to represent the field trip. So let me share. Okay, so I did the school bus, and it's not wonderful, but I'll show you how I did it. I started out with just a rectangle, and I did a squared off edges, but I'm going to round these. And I did this rectangle, just went straight across, but then I went back and drew over top of those lines and erased. So start out with your rectangle and then create the cab of your bus. And I actually flipped the picture that was on that inspiration page. The bus is facing this direction, and I flipped it and looked at it to draw it in this direction. So, but you can do the same exact thing and just do it in reverse. So then I drew the hood, and then I came down and I realized that this wheel well was kind of in the middle of that line. So I drew that. And then I drew the hood and this other wheel well. The tire, you're just seeing the bottom of the tire from back. And then this tire, circle, and then a little shadow in the front. And then you can do the grill. The windshield. And I did two little wipers, kind of looks like eyes. And then we have reflectors on the front of the bus. And I just wrote the word bus on it. And then back here at the back, I did the other wheel well, and I tried to keep it in line with this one in the front. The first one I drew was up here at the top. So just look and kind of keep it along that same line. And it's a cartoon, so don't worry about it being too perfect. And then you can draw the bottom of your bus. Then 2 lines. It says school bus. A little stop sign that I'll make red. And then some windows. And down here, I did the yellow lines. Like the bus is going to be driving on that side. And inside the yellow lines, I wrote out Psalm 32:8. And I didn't use the NLT translation, but I wish I had of because I like it. I will instruct you and teach you in the way you should go. Psalm 32:8. Here I drew a little red light and I drew lines out from the red to show stop. And right here, I'm going to write out something that is happening right now in all of this stressful situation of caregiving, of something that just made me want to stop, or something that, really just, it's probably going to be the fall when she fell. Everything had to stop. Everything in that I had planned for that day, it didn't happen. And then I'm just going to create this little windy, curvy road. I may draw some hills or mountains. I may have a yield sign, the stop sign. I might do another traffic light with yellow or green. And this kind of reminded me of the page we did with the windy, curvy, when we're thinking about all of the things God is doing in our life all the time. It put me in mind of that, of all these things that are happening. But this is really just about a particular situation that you are dealing with or that you have dealt with. And we're thinking about it as a field trip. It's going to be hard. It's going to be challenging. Somebody may get sick and throw up. Somebody may, we may get stranded in an airport for 2 or 3 days. Things are going to happen. But what is the learning? I know if I went back to those 5 students and I asked them about that trip, they would talk more about the learning and the competition where they got 3rd place in internationals than they would about the difficulties of getting home, because that's how much they learned and how much they grew as a group of students and as a team. So that's what I want you to take away from this lesson about a field trip is field trips don't last forever. They are temporary, and it's an opportunity for us to apply all of this stuff we learn.